Hello and welcome back to Comic Book Junkies. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Joe.
And today we're going to be talking about the recent happenings with DC Comics. We're going to get into this classic story, Kraven's Last Hunt, and we'll probably be touching on a little bit of movie speculation for Spider-Man 3 and for the movie Morbius. So Joe, let's start off with what just happened with DC in the past week or so here. So it looks like a whole bunch of corporate happenings just went on, and it looks like kind of what they're referring to as a bloodbath.
It's been called the DC Bloodbath. Warner Media announced a large layoff for their employees, especially for DC Comics. Approximately 20% of their staff is now laid off, which affects a third of the editorial staff. So to come with that, there was a lot of layoffs and a lot of titles being discontinued, more notably the Teen Titans, Suicide Squad, Hawkman, and Constantine. I wasn't reading Teen Titans or Suicide Squad because they were already bad books, but I did have Hawkman on my poll, so I'm a little sad about that. I thought it was a really good story for him and kind of really tied in the whole DC universe stuff with the Nth Metal. And then Constantine, I was not reading that, but that was one of the bigger titles that got discontinued. But to me, it felt like it was a long time coming. The New 52 was a flop. DC cutting ties with Diamond was another indicator. So now their books don't come out on Wednesdays anymore. DC Comics come out on Tuesdays because they went through a bunch of independent publishers. And now because of COVID-19, I think this was kind of an excuse for them to finally move forward with their layoff. So they definitely scaled back. The good news is that DC Comics isn't going anywhere. They're still publishing comic books, but they're putting more of an emphasis on moving their material, especially like the TV shows and movies, towards HBO Max. I believe that's going to be their new priority. And despite the news of the layoffs, I don't know if DC is going to be more condensed, more killer, no filler, or if it's kind of one step closer to them getting smaller as a company. So what do you think?
I'm kind of in agreement with you. I kind of think that they are just streamlining things. I mean, that's what happens when the corporate overlords take over. The new regime comes in, they want a fresh start. I mean, there was a bunch of old heads in there, like Bob Harris, a bunch of people like that. Jim Lee even got moved kind of like laterally out of his publishing position, which I mean, he probably shouldn't have been doing on his own since Didio got canned, which I liked that move because I felt like the kind of direction they were going with was kind of iffy. But then Jim Lee, he's going to be just CCO now. So, I mean, technically, he's still kind of above being a publisher. They actually have two other new publishers, I believe, Marie Javins and Michelle Wells. So, I mean, they kind of come from a background of having more of like a digital focus, a kind of more of the young adult, like the kids focus. Because, I mean, kids comics are huge right now. It's actually a big part of their sales, even though you don't see them at traditional comic book stores. So, I mean, it's just an editorial thing. I mean, at least they have something to do with comics. I heard one of their new interim publishers is actually coming from like the realm of esports. I don't really know. So, I mean, some people are kind of upset about that. They're like, well, he doesn't know anything about comics. And it's like, well, he doesn't necessarily have to. He just needs to make sure that the trains run on time. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a corporate thing. Like, do you know how to run the business? I mean, would it be better to be specialized and know exactly like tit for tat the market that you're working in now? Probably. Do you have to succeed? Not necessarily. That's what the people under you are doing. You're just making sure that they're running well. And you know what I think? I think it's going to be fine. I think they're cutting titles, I think 20 to 25% of their output, which kind of makes sense. I mean, it's something we saw back in the 70s as well with the implosion right after the DC explosion. They started putting out all these different titles. We almost saw Detective Comics get canceled. Didn't happen. But like the shrinking, the swelling, all of that with the comics market is very natural. The whole economy right now is hurting. The kind of market readership as compared to back in the day is smaller. But ultimately, I think the overall market's going to be fine. I think DC isn't going to start licensing out their characters right away or anything like that. I mean, but we really have no idea the long-term effects of this move. Something with like the corporate undertakings that always happen, you always see it down the line. You don't see it immediately. These are just like upper/middle editorial changes mostly, people that have been there for a long time. Anytime you get a new person in there, just like a football team, you get a new general manager, you fire the head coach, you bring your new guy in. You want to start fresh with your guys. So it's like,
gives them an opportunity to rebrand. So I do think it is an opportunity for them, and I don't think that they're going to be the only ones to scale down too. I think a lot of companies are doing that, and so it's not like Marvel's going to get all of the competition. It's definitely going to be different for DC moving forward, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if they can condense their titles and focus on the characters, get better creative teams for the titles that they are doing. It could potentially be an okay thing.
I agree with you 100% on that. We'll just have to see where this goes, but it's too early to call it now. So I say let's talk about what we do know, and that is Kraven's Last Hunt, boy.
That was actually one of my favorite reads since we've been doing the podcast.
Absolutely.
Title's Kraven's Last Hunt. It appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man and a few other Spider titles. Written by J.M. DeMatteis. Pencils by Mike Zeck. It's a 6-issue series published in 1987. And even just opening up that first issue, that first panel, it is sweet. The whole page is naked Kraven and a bunch of different animal heads behind him in the background to show that he's known for game. Spider-Man being the hardest thing to hunt and capture is why Kraven makes such a great villain. Even in the first few issues, he says he's from Russia. Lenin's dragged his homeland of Russia into the pit. He's not wrong, which is why his family moved here to the United States as a kid. The place he's staying at is super nice. It kind of reminds me of like a Catholic church, stained glass and Gothic architecture. And then he's kind of dissatisfied with not being able to catch Spider-Man at this point in his villain career, and it transitions to Peter Parker with the black costume wondering when he's gonna die. So flashes back to Kraven in a pit of spiders, and he's taking a handful and eating them. Trying to really get in the mind state of being the spider, very animalistic. After that, Spidey is trying to clear his head, webs around town, and out of nowhere, Kraven starts citing William Blake poetry, The Tiger. He says, "Spider, spider, burning bright in the forest of the night," and then hits him with a dart, knocks him out, and shoots him with the gun. So I can't think of a stronger first issue than that.
That was a hardcore story and a great retelling of exactly what happened. Dudes were going crazy the whole time. He's loose off that potion. He's just got like herbs and potions sitting in his like Gothic castle townhouse joint that he's got. He's just like running around the joint naked on like drugs, hallucinating, eating spiders, just being a fucking loon. And he's like, man, they called my mother crazy. My family kind of came here and toiled and lived in squalor. They were royals. Like, you know, he had like his own like demons, and he projected it onto the spider. He even says like everyone has their own spider, and Spider-Man literally is his spider. And it's just like he's accomplished everything he's wanted to accomplish. He recognizes his mortality. He's getting older as a villain, and he is just a man. He doesn't have any enhancements or special powers. He's just a dude, a ballsy ass dude. And I think that's where his drive really comes in, which I respect the hell out of that hustle. Because he comes in, he shoots Spidey with some darts. He's got Spidey tripping, makes him think he's Joe Face, that dude who just died. Spidey's like, hell no, that ain't Joe Face. And then he sees Kraven there, hits him with that heavy duty net, and then he whips out a rifle to pop a cap in his ass, and he's cheesing, bro. Spidey's like, he's like, no, you just want to punch me, right? And Kraven's like, nah, dude. He just shoots him, and it's like, whoa, that's badass of a thesis. Like, you just gripped the shit out of me for this story.
I was not expecting that first issue Spider-Man's already dead. Usually like the villain will catch the protagonist and list off why he's doing it, and then there's like some kind of escape, but he just cut right to the chase and shot him. And as far as we know, first issue, Spider-Man's dead. And I don't think that any other villain in the Marvel universe has officially killed Spider-Man. So that just shows how good of an adversary Kraven is. Moving into issue 2, the cool thing about Kraven and Peter, they have the same costume. So in the first issue, it's a little confusing. They're both wearing the black costume, so you don't know if Kraven's really acting as Peter or Peter's acting as Kraven, but they do make that distinction pretty clear when you're reading it. The only hard to believe part is that Kraven's like twice the size of Peter Parker. So if they're both wearing the same costume and one's twice the size of the other, you know, that would look a little weird. But moving into that second issue, they also introduced this character named Vermin, which I wasn't really too familiar with before this story. He's basically a rat person, and his first appearance, there was a woman walking by and he just sticks his hand out the sewer and and drags her in. Yeah, he snatched her. And then at this point, Kraven's still getting high off that root juice and is questioning why he's acting the way he is. Mary Jane at this point is kind of wondering where Peter Parker is. She's a very strong character, and basically she's used to not seeing Peter Parker come home, but at this point she's a little worried. It's at this part in the story where, I really decided I love the art, the way the black costume is drawn. I think they did that well, especially when Mary Jane is getting chased by those two dudes. Basically, some guys are catcalling her when she's in the streets looking for Peter Parker, and Kraven comes dressed in the black costume to beat them up, but and she knows that that's not actually Peter Parker.
How about her telling those dudes to just get stuffed? Total bad broad energy, dude.
She says, I can hear them running towards me. They're giggling like chimps in heat.
She tells them to get stuffed, though. That's ballsy. I mean, good on her, but like, them dudes were on her chase, dude. They're ready to tear her up.
Yeah, but for not having superpowers, I understand why she makes a good partner for Peter Parker.
I totally would rather be dealing with those dudes, too, than Vermin, because Vermin is strictly like chasing chicks or like snatching them up and eating them like ass first. Like, how about the fact that like he's just casually eating people? He's just snatching up women and eating them ass first like a hyena, I'm assuming. And then, I mean, he's just like, he's just going out there. So everything that Vermin being set up, like in the foreshadowing, like you kind of don't see why he's being introduced. You kind of see him as just like a goofy, smaller villain. Kind of start to see that he's actually not to be fucked with. He's actually pretty tough, even though he's kind of an idiot.
He really steps it up in issue 3.
Oh yeah, he definitely does, dude. That's my favorite part, because dude's like in there, he's fighting the cops and they're like, what the hell's that? He comes in, he grabs the dude, chucks him out of the car, and then he commands rats to go and swarm him. That was fucking nuts.
That was so cool.
But what was not equally, like way more creepy, is the fact that he gets out to the lady cop and he's like, she's got soft black skin and it looks like my mom's. And then he licks her face and just dips, bro. I'm like, what? That's not how you treat women or your mom.
I know, she shot him first too, and he's bleeding, and you think that's okay, right? No, he tackles her to the ground, holds her head firmly, and licks her cheek and says, "Mother, I love you."
He's like,
that's just so metal.
Lips, light black skin. Let me get a lick. And it's like, bro, that's creepy as all hell, dude. You can't be doing that. It's like, she should have shot him again. Dude, she had PTSD, and he calls off the rats, too, because he's like, oh, that looks like mom. And then he's just like, rats, get out of here. And they just listen to him. It's like, God, I hate this dude. He was honestly so disgusting. Between, like, eating people alive and then, like, assaulting people like that, it's like, I really hate this dude.
But Kraven doesn't, right? It's a chess piece in his game with Peter Parker. He finally wants to take him down because Spider-Man could never do it by himself. So he pre-games at his house, and he's got a rat in a cage and throws it right out his window. Fucking weird, but that's his sign that he's about to take this dude down.
Bro, he's on bath salts and K2, and he's just like fucking with rats in his house.
Oh, you think we're making this shit up, but we're not. At the end of the issue, that's exactly the case. He finally captures him, and Peter Parker is still 6 feet under the ground, and he wakes up, and he's just realizing that he's not dead or might be dead. And the last panel shows his arm popping out of the ground, but basically, whether he lived or died at this point, Kraven buried him alive, and that was pretty hardcore.
Yeah, and I like how he comes back and like Spidey's got all his ducks in a row. Like he finally starts to come to, and he's like tired as shit because obviously he's been buried alive for like 2 weeks, he says, and he never really died. He was just drugged underground for 2 weeks, and he's pissed off about wasting 2 weeks. It's like, that's me with my PTO. And then it's just like he comes back. First thing he does is go stop by MJ's to let her know that not only is he okay, but that he needs to clap some cheeks. And then he's like, then I'm gonna go fight. And it's like, respect. But
yeah, he's got to get his mind right.
Yeah, and she's like, honey, you're so messed up right now. You don't stand a chance. He's like, he can't even talk. He's just like, it'll get better. And then he just dips. And he's ready to fight Kraven, the dude who just whooped his ass. And Kraven, I love the like big dick energy Kraven has because he's like monologuing to him. He's explaining like how he's already been like 10 steps ahead. And he's like, I'm not going to fight you. I already won. I could have killed you, but I didn't.
You'd think him breaking into his house, you'd be kind of on high alert, but he's just like comfortable at this point. He knows that it was destiny opportunity for Peter to revisit him after he came up ground and broke out of his grave to visit him. And he even says that he feels like he won the challenge between them and that he's the only villain that could actually have killed him if he wanted to. The cool thing too is when he's telling him this, they're both in that black Spider-Man costume. At the end of that, he says that Vermin is the perfect fusion of man and animal, kind of like Spider-Man, a vile, tormented, beautiful beast, and that it even took Captain America to help him fight, but Kraven could do it by himself. So moreover, he's very cool, collected. He takes Spider-Man to his basement and shows him that Varmin's in a cage and like an electric cage, that he was able to do it, but Peter Parker can't. Yeah, he lets him loose on Peter Parker, and Peter Parker lets his guard down and he's about to eat him alive, but Kraven calls him off. At this point, Kraven thanks Spider-Man for everything he's learned by fighting him and defeating him, but he gives him the opportunity to choose. He says you can either at this point chase after Vermin, who's I just let loose on the city, or you can fight me. It's an easy decision at this point because Kraven kind of has his mind right.
Vermin's hanging out in that cage and he's just floating in the basement. And Kraven's like talking to Spider-Man and just showing him, like, he's like, look, I got a rat in a cage. And then he just keeps chucking like torches at him, dude. He keeps throwing them in there.
That's a Smashing Pumpkins song.
It is, dude. But like, they didn't mention the part where you throw like lit torches into the cage with it, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's at that point where he gives him the ultimatum, but he assures Peter Parker, he's like, I'm never going to hunt again. I beat you. So I really love the dialogue between Kraven and Spider-Man at this point, but Peter does leave. Kraven says his goodbye, in a sense. It's at the point where Peter Parker leaves the household to go chase him, and he's kind of reminiscing about himself, his parents, and the terrible part is he grabs a gun and finally kills himself and blows himself right into a casket. He had the whole thing planned. Says his goodbye, says his vow to never hunt again, and he really meant it.
Like, what a climax. Like, who would have thought that, like, he's like, I did it, I done it, I came, I saw, I conquered, and then boom, just offs himself. Like, what does he have to prove after that? He got what he wanted. What's his next feat? There's no moving the goalpost anymore. Like, he's literally beat and become superior to his largest foe, and he died with what he would consider honor.
Peter at this point has no other choice. Probably shoots another load, and MJ chases after Vermin, and at this point he's in the sewers. He kind of has that home advantage, and Peter Parker's not himself either. He's still a little dazed and confused because he got shot with that poison, so he's kind of having flashbacks to being buried. He doesn't really know if he's living or dead at this point. Meanwhile, the police roll up to Kraven's estate. They see that he's dead and has a confession letter saying that this whole time, that 2 weeks that Peter Parker lost, he was pretending to be him, and that he just wanted to prove that he could do a better job than Peter. So that was, in a sense, his victory. I thought that was really noble that he did leave that letter behind saying that it wasn't actually Peter Parker these last 2 weeks, it was him. The game's over at this point, so that gave a lot of respect to his character, and he even restored Peter Parker's reputation. When all is said and done, it was basically just he wanted to know that he's his best villain and that he is the best hunter on this planet. At the very end of the issue, Peter catches Vermin and sends him away to the police. He doesn't know whether or not Kraven committed suicide at this point or not, but the first thing he thinks of is going back to MJ. Very last panel shows a group of men burying Kraven, shoveling the dirt into the grave, and both a rat and a spider gets buried with him. I thought that was a really cool metaphor, and this is possibly got to be the best Spider-Man story ever told.
Yeah, dude, definitely. I would say it's the best one I've ever read, at least until this point. I mean, there's a few other classics and a few other stories that I'm familiar with but haven't read fully, but this actually blew away my expectations of the book. I was like, oh yeah, I've heard Kraven's Last Hunt's good. I've seen the panels where Kraven offs himself, stuff like that. And I was like, that seems pretty badass. But reading it issue for issue, they went by really quick, but they were all very impactful. It was very condensed storytelling, but it wasn't too much. So it kind of got the point across very smoothly. The art was fantastic. I'm a big Mike Zeck guy, especially like his run he did with Deathstroke in the 90s. So I'm already fairly familiar. So like the art was very dynamic as well, very impactful, emotional, kind of kinetic. It kind of showed the energy that you could see the characters moving with. I would say it's my favorite Spidey story. This was by far my favorite book we've read to this point. Let's get into the ratings. I'm going to go with you because I think I've made it very clear what I'm giving it.
I would probably rate it a 10 out of 10. The only other story I've rated that high this far has been Watchmen, so it's on par with that. Watchmen might be my favorite so far, just because it spread over 12 issues. This spread over 6, so it felt a little short in that regard, but I love the Spider-Verse rat motif. I thought that was interesting. I would love to see Marvel adapt this story as a movie. It's definitely one of Spider-Man's best stories. A little dark. I don't think it would make for a good Tom Holland movie as far as like a third Spider-Man movie. Something that Fox could bring up. They are a little more able or willing to tell a darker story. So for the fact that they already did Venom, it might be a good transition for them to move from like Venom, Morbius, and then maybe Kraven's Last Hunt. But either way, this definitely is a story that needs to be told, and it was one of the best comic book stories that I've ever read.
Wouldn't disagree with you there. Only thing that I do like, you dropped that little hook, line, and sinker, because that's what we're talking about next, boy. So he mentioned Morbius, he mentioned Spider-Man, he mentioned Tom Holland, he mentioned Kraven. All of these things, what do they have to do with movies, boy? So yeah, I'm thinking that Kraven's totally in the line for Spider-Man 3. Opposite Joe's opinion, I don't think they're going to roll with Sony, whoever he's under now. I don't think that they're going to do like that separate Sinister Six stuff that they were planning on, which I kind of thought was like ill-fated without a proper Spider-Man. I could see this working in that vein. I agree with you on that. I don't think that they will. I think that Disney and Spider-Man, their property, is totally going to run with Kraven in the next movie, is my thought. I've actually heard rumors swirling about that, and I'd like for them to be true. And I think that, you know, after he got outed in the last movie, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen a like fairly recent Marvel movie, yeah, dude, he's on the run. He's just got exposed by Jake Gyllenhaal, and now all of a sudden, where's he gonna go? He's already barely been in New York the first 2 movies. Bet you he goes and hides down in Africa, and then Kraven's gonna go hunt his ass because that's what Kraven does. And I think that's gonna be cool. It's not gonna be this story, which is unfortunate, but I think that assuming they cast a good Kraven, they've been pretty good with Michael Keaton and Jake Gyllenhaal so far. But if they can cast a good Kraven, Spider-Man 3 should be sweet to end off a trilogy.
That would be ideal for me, but like I said, I feel like it's a little too dark of a story in general, the whole Kraven committing suicide at the very end.
Oh, they won't do this.
Exactly. But that's the story that they need to tell. And so that's kind of why I want Sony to take it over. Not that they make better movies than Marvel, but because they're more obliged to take that kind of dark liberty. But yeah, Morbius is supposed to release before that as far as the Fox movies distributed by Sony. This is going to be the second Marvel movie that they've made following the Venom movie with Tom Hardy. Basically, Michael Morbius is a guy with a rare blood disease. He uses illegal methods to cure himself, which is a result of him turning into a vampire. He does not have the weakness that usual vampires do in vampire lore, but he does have a thirst for blood. I think that movie in particular looks a lot cooler than Jared Leto's take on the Joker with the whole damage written on his head. I thought that was kind of poor take on the Joker, but Jared Leto has a chance to redeem himself with being Morbius. I think that it's a good opportunity for him because he's traditionally been a good actor, especially with like Requiem for a Dream.
I probably won't see it. I'm totally skipping that. Anything that Sony pushes out is like me on the toilet after Taco Bell. That's the same level of pushing out that they're doing, dude. I don't agree with all the movies that they're putting out. So I'm just like, hold it. Like, you want to make it Spider-Man related? Sure. But tell me why in the holy hell would we give a damn about a Morbius movie when they're going to do like that typical cinematography of like an early 2000s movie, and it's gonna be like dun 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 dun, and he's gonna be like transforming. It's gonna be like whoa, CGI party. And
Eminem might rap over it.
please don't, dude.
You're right.
It's just like it's another level of corny and cheesy, but like with a hint of edge. And it's like I don't need that. Like I get it, but like you keep pushing out tanks, or like I don't know. I guess Venom did well, but it doesn't seem right. So,
it wasn't a great movie. I think the only thing that made it an okay movie was that they hired Tom Hardy, so that was a good decision on their part because he's already a really good actor. I'm hoping that they kind of see that with Jared Leto and it's a little better, but I agree that Marvel makes better production than Sony ever will.
But I could see like at least down the line the Tom Holland, Tom Hardy, Venom, Spider-Man meeting in some regard because of just the pop that Venom has. But unless Morbius is fucking blockbuster, I don't see the potential for that down the line. And I feel like they're just risking the biscuit for no reason, really. Why a Morbius movie? Like, are you putting it out around Halloween? Do you want like a loosely affiliated Spider-Man movie that's like a monster movie, but not really because he looks like Vampire Jesus and he's just going to get hunted by the CIA or something, like in every half monster, half superhero movie? Like, oh my God, the military's got to stop him. He's too strong. And then he's like, I feel persecuted by the government because I'm a freak. And then he's going to fall in love, and then she's going to get bit, or there's going to be witty banter, and then yippity doo dah, who cares? Not me. But I mean, hey, not knocking it. Y'all like it. Morbius is a cool comic character. I just don't know where the movie property really fits into the grand scheme of things.
Like I said, I think it just comes down to the storytelling. You know, I don't think Marvel's willing to risk grittier storylines, but overall, Marvel does a better job of the storytelling than Sony ever will, because even though they own the rights to these characters, it's never going to fit in like a cinematic universe that Marvel does.
I can agree to that. That's all I've got for today. How about you, Joe? Any closing thoughts?
The only thing that I will have to say, I definitely recommend Kraven's Last Hunt, an essential read. I think it's more of a complex read. So if you're new to comics, I would wait to read this, but it was one of the better series ever created. So 10 out of 10 boobs. Next episode, we're going to take it back to The Amazing Spider-Man. We had such a good time reviewing a Marvel story that we want to do the night Gwen Stacy died. That's supposed to be one of the other best stories ever told in Amazing Spider-Man. So that's one of the reasons why CBJ wants to review that next.
Yeah, and if you like this content, make sure you do go ahead and check us out on all social media. We are on Facebook at CBJ Podcast. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at CBJ Pod. And you can also find us on YouTube on traditional podcast directories. So you can find us on all of those. Make sure to like, listen, subscribe, do what you got to do, tell your friends. And if you have any recommendations for what you'd like us to talk about, any certain type of story, any type of content, if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to ask.
Definitely, if you're listening to us by podcast, definitely recommend your friends to download, whether they use Spotify, Apple Music, or Google. And we will catch you next episode.
Later, guys.